Welcome to our webinar on improving the accuracy and security of voter records. I'm Diana Wynn, President of the League of Women Voters of Wake County. I'm going to address some preliminary information and then I'll introduce you to our presenter for this webinar. Before we begin, I want to clarify a couple things about how we are using Zoom today. Except for the presenter, everyone is muted and you're not on video. We're not using the chat feature in Zoom today. Instead, type your questions in the Q&A feature. If you hover your computer mouse near the center bottom of your Zoom screen, a menu will appear. You should then be able to click on the Q&A option. Some questions may be answered in writing and others will be answered live at the end of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, LWV Wake Vice President Sheila Den will serve as our moderator and ask our presenter some of the questions that you submit in the Q&A box. I'd now like to introduce you to our presenter, Laurie Bader. Laurie is a member of the LWV Wake Voter Services Committee and began researching voter record management a couple years ago. She has led our effort in researching, writing, and advocating on this issue, and she is the primary author of LWV Wake's report titled Employing Technology to Ensure Accurate and Secure Elections Records. You can find the full report on our website at lwvwake.org in the Election Protection section of the website. Laurie has a bachelor's degree in computer science and was a software engineer for IBM for 32 years. While at IBM, she designed and developed many new software products and project managed global teams. In addition to serving on LWV Wake's Voter Services Committee registering voters and leading us on the issue of voter record management, she is also LWV Wake's Vote 411 coordinator. I'll now turn it over to our speaker, Laurie Bader.
Thank you, Diana. Welcome to everyone and thank you for joining today. Voter list maintenance is the process that state and county election officials use to maintain accurate and up-to-date voter records. North Carolina elections officials are required by state law to perform voter list maintenance. Specifically, North Carolina list maintenance statute requires the State Board of Elections to perform list maintenance at least twice a year, to remove the names of ineligible voters, and to update the addresses and other necessary data of eligible voters. Sorry about that phone in the background. List maintenance, the statute goes on to state that list maintenance should be non-discriminatory and to comply with the provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and with the provisions of the National Voter Registration Act. However, maintaining accurate and complete voter lists is a significant and complex problem. Many eligible voters are not on the lists, which also can be fraught with inaccuracies. And these issues lead to major problems downstream in the elections process. And since so much of elections reform is viewed through a partisan lens, the inaccuracies can lead to polarizing divisions. The League of Women Voters supports an election system that inspires trust in election results. Accurate voting records are fundamental to that trust. Today, I will present technology improvements that are essential for increasing and maintaining the accuracy and integrity of North Carolina's voting records. So let's start by discussing the problems that lead to inaccuracies in voter records. Voter list problems. A study commissioned by the Pew Charitable Trust that included input from over 200 state and local election officials identified the key problems leading to inaccuracies in voter lists: the mobility of the American public, communication issues between voters, agencies, and third parties, bad data matching by state election officials during voter list maintenance, and the public perception of bloated and inaccurate voting lists. So let's talk about mobility. American election administration is decentralized, meaning there's no national list of registered or eligible voters. States maintain their own voter registration lists, and maintenance of these lists is governed by state laws. No federal law requires states to coordinate. Americans are mobile. Each year, millions of Americans move between states and therefore often appear on more than one state's voter list. In 2012, a study commissioned by the Pew Trust found that approximately 2.75 million people were registered to vote in more than one state, and more than 1.8 million deceased people were listed as voters. As a result, 1 in 8 voter records are inaccurate. In addition, many eligible voters are not on the voter list, and it's been estimated that 25% of the eligible US population is unregistered to vote. Communication. US election officials have identified the following challenges. 1, voters do not understand how voter registration works and when they have the responsibility to update their records. Motor vehicle agencies have done a poor job of forwarding voter registration information to election agencies. And third-party groups exacerbate the problem, often waiting until immediately before a major election and then inundating election offices with paper voter registration forms, many of which are duplicate or illegible. These updates must be entered manually, leading to errors in the voters' records. For example, and you've probably heard this story, in Tennessee, a massive influx of voter registration applications before the 2018 midterm left elections officials struggling to add new voters to the rolls and to reach out to residents who submitted incomplete or incorrect personal information. Some of the elections officials suspected voter fraud and alleged that canvassers filled in false information on forms and registered felons to vote to meet supposed quotas. In Shelby County, on the last day to register to vote, the Election Commission received approximately 10,000 registration forms from one organization alone. In total, one voter activist group submitted 24,000 applications, many with invalid mailing addresses, incorrect date of birth information, or social security numbers belonging to someone else. So as a result of this, the Tennessee legislature passed a new state law that seeks to curb mass voter registration by imposing criminal and financial penalties for turning in error-filled forms or failing to register with the state and undergo their training. Bad data matching. So it's fair to ask, what is bad data matching? And I have some epic fails to tell you about with data matching. In 2016, Georgia was sued for blocking tens of thousands of eligible voters from voter rolls due to mismatched information. The state denied almost 35,000 registration applications from 2013 to 2016 based on discrepancies like an out-of-place hyphen, a space, or an apostrophe in their voter registration forms. Of those, Black applicants were 8 times more likely to fail the state's verification process than white applicants. And Latinos and Asian Americans were 6 times more likely to fail, according to the suit. In 2018, October 9th of 2018, the Associated Press reported that 53,000 voter registrations were being held by the Georgia Secretary of State for failing to clear an exact match process that compares registration information to Social Security and state driver license records. So let's move on to Texas. In 2012, Texas mistakenly identified 68,000 voters as deceased and therefore eligible to be removed from the state's voter rolls. State elections officials repeatedly and mistakenly matched active, longtime Texas voters to deceased strangers across the country, some of whom have been dead for more than a decade, in an error-ridden effort to purge dead voters just weeks before the presidential election. An Austin lawyer who successfully sued to slow this flawed purge was apparently mixed up with a Wisconsin resident who had been dead since 2003. And last, let's talk about Florida. In 2000, Florida used unreliable felony conviction data combined with bad data matching to misidentify 12,000 people as ineligible to vote. Unreliable felony conviction data was used to remove voters whose last name matched just 80% of the letters in the last name of someone with the criminal conviction. Harry Sawyer, an election supervisor in Key West, was stunned when Florida officials sent him a list of 150 convicted felons to cut from his county's voter rolls. Among those on the list were one of his election employees, another worker's husband, and his own father, none of whom was a felon. Public perception. There's a wide public perception of bloated and outdated voter lists enabling fraud. I'm sure you've heard claims that dead people are voting and that double voting, which is voting more than once in the same election, is prevalent. And the perception of this has led to some purge attempts. Accusations of double voting led to purge attempts of 4,000 voters in 3 North Carolina counties before the 2016 election. The court has since ordered that those registrations be restored. In April of 2020, Judicial Watch sued North Carolina over failing to clean voter rolls in Mecklenburg and Guilford counties. The suit claims that as of March 2020, North Carolina's own data shows that it has nearly 1 million inactive registrations in the state. The League of Women Voters of North Carolina has filed a motion to intervene in this suit. I'm sure you've also heard of Crosscheck, which was developed by the Kansas Secretary of State's office in 2005 to compare databases among participating states to identify duplicate voter registrations and double voting. And it was championed as the tool that was going to find voter fraud. While researchers at Stanford, Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, and Microsoft have found that Crosscheck produced a flood of false positive and raised the risk of disenfranchising legal voters. A detailed analysis showed that Crosscheck incorrectly identified double voting 99% of the time. Additional investigation found that Crosscheck is riddled with security flaws. So today Crosscheck is essentially dormant. Kansas stopped using Crosscheck in 2018 rather, and interestingly enough, the Kansas elections director has gone on record recommending that the state use ERIC. So there is a significant cost of voter list errors, and some of the consequences of inaccurate voter lists are increased returned mail and increased mailing costs, long lines at polling places, unnecessary provisional ballots, general voter confusion and dissatisfaction, a lack of public trust in elections, vulnerability to fraud, and concerns about election integrity in general. There is a better solution to increase the accuracy of voter lists, and that solution is ERIC. The Pew Charitable Trust began working on a solution to voter list inaccuracies in 2009 that could not be undermined by partisan polarization. One key member of that Pew working group was Jeff Jonas, a data and identity resolution expert who has been recognized by National Geographic as the Wizard of Big Data. Jonas proposed creating a secure multi-state data center that would use cutting-edge Big data and artificial intelligence technology to find inaccuracies in voter lists. And the result was ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. ERIC went live in 2012 with only 7 states, but as of March 2020, 30 states plus the District of Columbia have since joined ERIC. ERIC provides accuracy. Feedback from elections officials indicates that they generally do not have access to modern data matching technology that is used in private industry. ERIC provides its member states with a secure state-of-the-art data matching service that is superior to what states can perform on their own. The states securely send their voter registration and DMV data to the ERIC data center. The ERIC data matching algorithms compared the data received against data from other states and from federal databases. The result of this match analysis is summarized in 2 reports. The first report is a list of potential inaccuracies, including voters who may have moved either in state or out of state, duplicates or deceased voters. And the second report is really interesting. This is a report of potential voters who are not currently registered. After receiving this match analysis, the states then contact voters to correct the inaccuracies found and update their voting rolls, following their state and their federal laws on voter list maintenance. ERIC membership also requires that states contact the eligible but unregistered voters that had been identified by ERIC's match analysis. So why is data matching hard? Comparing data sources, such as a voter registration form with DMV records, to verify a voter's current residence is complex. And this table illustrates why exact matching of a name might yield poor results. There can often be several spelling variations for a name. Nicknames might be used. Bill in one place and William in another form. First and middle initials may be used in some instances, like J.E. versus James Earl. Prefixes or suffixes may or not be present in a name, like Rick Smith versus Rick Smith Jr. or Rick Smith Sr. Personal names are heavily influenced by a person's cultural background. And people can change their names over time, most commonly when they marry. Now, if you remember back to what I said earlier, gave you the epic fails of data matching. Remember, Georgia denied voter registration applications based on discrepancies like an out-of-place hyphen or a space or an apostrophe. So in the top row of this table, second from the left, Mary Ellen would not match Mary Space Ellen or Mary Dash Ellen in their match process. Remember, Texas mistakenly identified 68,000 voters as dead due to their bad data matching. And in Florida, this particularly epic fail chose to match only 80% of a voter's last name to their list of convicted felons. What I read was actually the technology company that performed this match for them told the state of Florida that this was a bad idea, that there would be a lot of false positives, but Florida asked them to go ahead and do it. And of course, the result was disenfranchising voters and lawsuits to fix that. Data matching is where ERIC excels. ERIC's superior data matching algorithms, remember they were designed by Jeff Jonas, the guy that National Geographic called the wizard of big data. The software is basically artificial intelligence fine-tuned for spotting and resolving identities. So the algorithms use common identifying data elements and tools like name variation databases and fuzzy date matching, and something called record linkage to validate matches. And record linkage is a matching methodology where multiple data sources are compared concurrently. The data sources that ERIC uses to compare our federal Social Security death records, are also known as the Social Security Master Death Index, motor vehicle records from ERIC member states. Remember, there are over 30 of them now. The federal change of address records from the Postal Service, and voter registration records from ERIC member states. The security of sensitive personal information used in ERIC's data matching process is critical. ERIC follows industry guidelines for risk management, data privacy, and information security. Experts in the field of data security and encryption advise the ERIC Data Center. ERIC system engineer assists the states in anonymizing sensitive private data like Social Security numbers before the data is transmitted to the ERIC Data Center. Multiple rounds and types of encryption are used on the data that is transmitted, and there are specific procedures for communicating member credentials. ERIC also meets new federal audit standards required to receive the Social Security Master Death Index. The federal government now requires that anyone receiving this data undergo a security audit by a third party once every 3 years, and ERIC pays for this. Here's an example of what the data flow would be if the state of North Carolina were using ERIC. In the upper left quadrant, you can see that North Carolina would package its voter registration data and DMV data. And I will note here that a requirement is that only voters who are citizens be sent to ERIC. The ERIC Data Center and the system engineer provide the state, or would provide the state, with software tools that would let them anonymize the data so that none of the data is like Social Security numbers or dates of birth would be transmitted in the clear and readable by another human. And this is so that if for somehow the data is hacked, the data would not be readable or useful to a hacker. If you follow the gold arrow, that's the input line. So once the data would be anonymized, it would be uploaded to the secure server in the ERIC Data Center. And then once inside the ERIC Data Center in the box on the right, ERIC actually anonymizes the data a second time and then puts it through its data matching algorithms. The output is shown in the green arrows. The output of the match analysis is that list of eligible but unregistered voters, and also the list maintenance reports, which are all the movers and the duplicates and the deceased individuals. And those reports are put back on the secure server for the state to download. So the state has to act on this data. ERIC doesn't, ERIC provides the smart data, but it's up to the states to use that data in their voter list validation process. ERIC has some impressive cumulative results. They provide actionable data to the states that they can use to then update their lists. You'll see here over 3.5 million identified as moving cross state and over 9.5 million within the state. But even more important, I think, on the bottom, ERIC has helped states reach out to over 34 million eligible but unregistered voters. So data is still being analyzed from recent elections, but it's estimated that over 5 million of these new voters did register to vote. So ERIC is a very useful tool for the State Board of Election to use for voter outreach. So ERIC member states have provided feedback on their success with ERIC. The state of Minnesota found that they increased voter turnout by 17,000 ballots, and they had a sharp decline in same-day registrations because voters were contacted throughout the year and that were notified that they should update their address as the state was performing its list maintenance process. Delaware experienced reduced returned mail from 8 bins down to 3 bins of undeliverable mail. And Colorado increased its number of eligible voters from 82% to 90% because of ERIC's outreach. In the state of Washington, their first ERIC report identified 947 deceased voters that they had previously missed. And this is impressive, I think, because the state of Washington was already using the Social Security Master Death Index, but ERIC's better data matching capabilities found those additional individuals for them. The state of Oregon found 900 residents that had actually died in other states, but were still on their voter rolls. And Rhode Island reported that the work of updating voter lists was evenly distributed throughout the year since using ERIC in their voter list maintenance process. ERIC is cost effective. More accurate voter lists create more effective and efficient cost mailings and less undeliverable mail. The staff time required to maintain voter lists is decreased and distributed evenly throughout the year as opposed to a surge right before an election. ERIC pays the fees to obtain the federal data sources. So instead of states having to each pay that fee individually, ERIC is doing that purchase. Cleaner voter lists result in fewer provisional ballots and shorter lines at polling places. I think it should also be noted that the cost of maintaining the ERIC data center, of a data center with sophisticated hardware and software, is shared by the states. States don't have to pay for that individually. So here are the ERIC member states, 30 plus the District of Columbia. North Dakota has no voter registration, so that's a different color. The ERIC member states are in green. In Massachusetts, the governor has signed a bipartisan bill to join ERIC. They just haven't formally done so yet. In this list, Texas is the newest member to have joined, and they joined in March of this year. Georgia and Florida are also recent members of ERIC, so hopefully those epic fails of bad data matching in those states will be a thing of the past. I think it's also important to note that both red and blue states have joined ERIC. And here's just another list of those states in a table format. ERIC has broad support. The GAO has stated that ERIC provides improved accuracy and that translates to cost savings. The National Academies of Science has stated that all states should participate in a high-quality industry matching tool system such as ERIC. The National Council of State Legislatures stated that state-of-the-art technologies with strong data matching capabilities result in reduced error rates, fewer voting discrepancies, and improved system integrity. And the last one I think is most important. Research Triangle Institute quoted state officials saying, ERIC results are more accurate than any process that they could have implemented independently. So we actually have some projections for the state of North Carolina. The former attorney with the State Elections Board communicated with the executive director of ERIC, provided some data about voters in North Carolina. And based on this, the ERIC executive director provided this estimate of what the first run of ERIC would find. And he said that his estimates have proven to be fairly accurate with other new states that they have joined ERIC. So note that projected move voters, 392,000 within the state, 162,000 who have moved out of the state. But I think what is really interesting to us as the League of Women Voters is the last bullet there. The estimate is that the first ERIC one would find 2 million eligible but unregistered voters in North Carolina. So in summary, trust in elections is essential to democracy. And voter list accuracy is fundamental to that public trust. And my hope is that if North Carolina could tout that they use a state-of-the-art voter list maintenance technique like ERIC, that purging attempts from groups like Judicial Watch, who have claimed that there are over 1 million inactive records in North Carolina, would not really have much of a leg to stand on. Voters in ERIC states are more likely to have voter records that are up to date, resulting in fewer problems when they go to vote. the League of Women Voters of Wake County recommends that North Carolina join ERIC. The full report is available on our website at www.lbwake.org in the election protection section. I also want to mention, you might want to check out the ERIC website. It's just ericstates.org. And there's a nice little 2-minute video on the front page that shows how exactly the ERIC data matching process works. And just to talk about what we've done so far, in 2019, Jan Ramquist did discuss ERIC with the state legislature. And we have met with the State Board of Elections Executive Director and her staff twice in 2019 to advocate for ERIC. We've also had exchanged email and had phone conversations with the Executive Director of ERIC, who is Shane Hamlin. And going forward, I would recommend that we continue ERIC education and awareness and advocacy. And I think a realistic goal would be to push perhaps for North Carolina to join ERIC in 2021. So with that, I'll say thank you for listening, and I'll turn it over to Sheila to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Laurie. We do have a few questions. The first one, how much chance do we think there is that North Carolina actually will sign on to ERIC? Will the lost tax revenue since the pandemic lessen those chances?
So in our conversations with, for example, Karen Brinson Bell and her staff, they were positive. They have considered joining ERIC in the past. One concern that they mentioned was the cost of the initial mailings, because after the first run, I mean, there will be like those 2 million eligible but unregistered voters that they would have to send a postcard or a household mailing to. And yes, I don't expect it would be something that that the board would join this year because of the pandemic, but because there is much time is required to get everybody on board and get approval, possibly go to the legislature, I think that 2021 or after the November election and into 2021 will be a time to really push for joining ERIC.
Thank you. Our next question, how easy is it to track down a voter voting in 2 different states?
I would say it's, I don't know that it's that easy. And actually, research shows that there's a very low incidence of that happening, like a less than 1% incidence. It's just that for some reason the public has this perception that it's happening. ERIC does have the capability, I've noticed in their membership agreement, to help track down fraud. So in addition to these voter list maintenance runs, ERIC says that they will work with the state to try and help find any incidents of fraud or double voting.
Thank you. The next question, what is the most important issue in North Carolina in particular to ensure that all eligible voters show up on our rolls, in your opinion?
I think the outreach is maybe one of the most important things, given that we have over 2 million people who are potential voters and not registered.
Thank you. We have a question. I don't know that you will know the answer to this. How much does it cost? I would assume how much would it cost for North Carolina in particular to join ERIC, and who in North Carolina has the authority to decide whether we join ERIC or not?
So the cost is a $25,000 initial fee. The annual membership dues depend upon the number of states that join. As more states join, the annual dues decrease. The estimate that we got from the ERIC Executive Director in 2019 was that North Carolina would have to pay annual dues of about $40,000. But Texas has joined since then. So my guess is, that maybe has decreased by a couple of $1,000s.
And I would just note that that is a tiny, tiny portion of the state's annual overall budget.
Yeah, as far as authority, that's not clear. We got the impression last year that the State Board of Elections did not need any permission from the legislature or any change in laws. This was under their control, how they spend their budget.
Thank you. Do you know what method the Board of Elections uses to check whether voters listed are dead or deceased?
They use.
Let me say this again. What method do they use to check whether voters listed as dead or deceased are mistakenly identified? And how many errors have state boards of election found following the purge of 500,000 voters in 2019?
So the state has a detailed voter list maintenance process. Right now they rely on reports from the Department of Health and Human Services and self-reporting for deceased individuals. And they are required, I believe, to try and send mail, contact somehow that person to verify that the person is indeed deceased.
Thank you. What can we do to encourage the state to join ERIC?
I think continued advocacy. After the November election, we should probably circle back again with the State Board of Elections Executive Director and her staff to find out if they have any more concerns and what else we could do to try and move this forward.
Thank you. Do you have any idea why California and New York aren't ERIC states?
I don't know. I have not been able to find that out. I did find in Googling that in 2018, there was a bill introduced in the California state legislature to join ERIC. I don't know what happened to that bill. But for example, California and New York also do not participate in Vote 411. So they are large states and they have their own infrastructure and they do their own thing. I don't really know why.
What key objections to ERIC have been expressed by other states, and how did those states overcome those objections? Do you know?
I honestly don't know. I haven't heard of states that have had objections to ERIC.
I assume that means when the states were at the point where we are now, where they were considering ERIC but haven't yet signed on.
Yeah, I haven't found that data, so I don't know.
Okay. Are any North Carolina politicians aware of and or pushing back on using ERIC in North Carolina?
So Jan Ramquist did take the first version of this report to the state legislature in 2019. And I don't know if Jan is on, but I remember her saying that there was a little bit of pushback from David Lewis because he said he was not interested in trying to register 2,000 more people in North Carolina.
I will note that David Lewis has announced that he is retiring from the legislature.
Yeah.
So that's one negative voice who's no longer going to be there.
Right.
Let's see. We have more questions about what we can do to push for this or encourage others to push for it. I think you've already addressed
I
that.
will say I'm certainly open to ideas.
And when I get through with questions, I'll give you an email address where if you have ideas, you can send them, or if you want more information. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Does ERIC help with bar scan codes on all the mail-in ballots so the state can figure out the status of each document?
No.
Okay. So they are really, let me just ask you if my understanding is correct. So ERIC is not actually involved with the election process and the processing of votes themselves, but really of the registration lists. Is my understanding correct?
That's correct.
So we have had a question about how much ERIC costs.
Mhm.
Now we have a question, are there any cost savings to the state by joining ERIC?
So some of the results have said that from other states that they have recouped all their initial costs within 2 to 4 years. But the major cost will be in improving the election experience, right, by having cleaner voter rolls. Like I said, fewer provisional ballots, less confusion, hopefully fewer challenges. You know, is this person really registered to vote in this county?
Let's see what else we have. What's the best message for voters for this election so that we don't discourage voters and add to the distrust of the election outcome? In other words, what would you see as our best use of the time now before the election, given that there is this perception out there of voter fraud?
North Carolina does have a voter list maintenance process, and it is required by state law that they perform it twice a year. They do use the Postal Service National Change of Address database and the Department of Health and Human Services database. So it certainly is not the case that North Carolina does not do this at all. They do have a process.
Right. Okay. So there was a person, and I'm trying now to get where she is from, who wanted to make the comment that she had asked her local board of election about ERIC months ago, and the director there was not familiar with it. Do you feel that there is education we need to do of local boards of election about ERIC?
That could be helpful. The decision, I think, will be made by the State Board of Elections. But certainly, I mean, for example, some of the bad data matching technique examples that I had, it was local boards of elections who suffered.
Okay. In terms of the what can we do kinds of questions, there's put out here, should we put out information about ERIC for the public and encourage them to support ERIC via personal Facebook pages or other social media? Should we send comments to our own legislators about ERIC? Do you think that those activities would be useful at this point?
I am, and this is just my thoughts, I am leery about asking the public for support because I don't want to give the public the impression that North Carolina's voter lists are terribly flawed, or have them, you know, think, oh, maybe this Judicial Watch lawsuit of over 1 million inactive voters is really true, and I don't want them to lose trust in North Carolina's elections. I think it's more of a question of the elections board and perhaps the legislature I'm not sure exactly, again, what role the legislature might have to pay, but I have noticed that every announcement, as each state joins ERIC, that announcement comes from either the Secretary of State or from the governor of that state.
It was mentioned before that outside groups flood boards of election with registration applications that are flawed in some way, which exacerbates the problem. Please tell us the League of Women Voters is not one of those outside groups.
No, I mean, throughout the year, the League of Women Voters, well, before the pandemic especially, registers new voters at the nationalization ceremonies, and has had, again, before the pandemic, voter registration drives throughout the year.
I'm not sure I quite understand. So the comment is, so ERIC does not routinely share data among states to
No.
clean up data of folks registered in 2 states.
No.
Oh, okay.
Each state only has access to the output reports for their state. So data about a state's potential inaccuracies are not shared across states.
Okay. What is the mechanism for overseeing ERIC? Who is ERIC's watchdog?
ERIC does have a board of directors. They also have several different advisory boards on the subjects of security and privacy and business continuity.
Thank you. Do you feel that the legislature is hesitant to push for ERIC now, prior to the election, but might become more friendly after the election?
Well, I think that's certainly true. And so I mean, when are they next in session? January?
Well, unless they do a lame duck, which they have
Yeah.
done before.
Yeah. So no, I don't think we would bring this up until January if we need to bring it up with the legislature.
Okay. All right. Well, I believe that that is all of, oh, no, I said it too soon. Another one just came in under the wire. In the documentary Slay the Dragon, a man affiliated with an organization presented to a local board a list of people he thought were inaccurately registered, just like a person affiliated with an outside organization. Does that kind of thing go on?
Possibly, and I think Marion may be able to answer this question better than me, but I can believe it goes on, especially given that there have been other parties like Judicial Watch and like a group I think called the Voter Integrity Project that have challenged if certain people are indeed registered voters.
Yeah, I do believe the Voter Integrity Project was involved with that for a while. Well, I believe that is all of our questions. So with that, let me thank Laurie. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it was very informative for all of us about a system that I think could be of real benefit to voters in North Carolina. I want to say to our attendees that if you have any ideas for Laurie about ways that we can advocate for this, or if you have any more questions, to please get in touch with us at info@lwvwake.org. That's info@lwvwake.org. And we'd be happy to hear from you. And with that, I will wish all of you a wonderful afternoon and see you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.